Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com, and I'm very glad to have you again here at the studio called allpointstv.com and the program called What's Going On. And also the listeners over there on Saturdays as we repeat the program at 12 o'clock in the afternoon at WFOV. And we are always happy to have them aboard because we are serving a wider audience with that particular production, and they're doing an excellent job over there. And I want to give a shout out again to the visionary over there, and that is the great Paul Herring. Paul just had a successful program on the Juneteenth celebration, and he's been doing that for a number of years. I don't know of anything that he can do in addition to what he's doing right now, but he'll find some way to use his services, because everything that's happening in the community, almost, it seems like Paul Herring is somewhere around. I give him a lot of credit, and I think he's doing a fantastic job for the city of Flint. We need to give this man a lot more flowers and give us our flowers while we live. I want to talk today about a couple of topics that are current based upon the national setting and what is happening with the migration and with the tariff policies of the United States. Maybe I can bring in a part of the discussion that occurred last night on the Mark Levine program, where they had the Flint economist from the University of Michigan. There was a guest on Mark Levine's program, and they were talking about the tariff policies of the Donald Trump administration, some of which I agreed with and some of which I don't agree with. And I know it's saying a lot because Mark Perry is a well-known and highly noted economist. It does not mean that he does not have some bottlenecks in some of the things that are being said, that were said last night. And I'm going to come behind him. Yes, I am going to come behind him. I'm going to say some things a little bit different about what I consider to be a blind spot in some of the analyses that he made last night on Mark Levine's program. Let me start off. Maybe I can start off there. Although I want to merge into Mad Maxine Waters and these Democrats, and also the liberal media that has everything in their cases backwards and wrong, upside down, because Donald Trump is doing exactly the right thing in terms of stopping the floodgates of people flooding into this country illegally. And we've got to understand what the bottleneck is and the problem is. It's not Donald Trump. It's the Democratic Party. It's also these milquetoast Republican rhino politicians that don't want to take the necessary steps to secure the borders of this country because they're afraid of how it may look to the American people. So rather than serving the interests of the country, they're doing what politicians do, and that is to run for the hills as soon as some political heat comes their way, and to make all the bad decisions that affect the nation state, while in fact they are aggrandizing their own position as politicians in the Beltway, this organized gangsterism in the nation's capital. And they're continuing this. I don't expect them to do anything different. This is what politicians do. All they do is put the country behind the 8 ball. And that's just par for the course. If anybody expect these politicians to resolve the nation's problems, I can tell you right now, you're waiting in vain. These people are nothing but they're running an anti-American criminal enterprise in the nation's capital. And that's what the politicians have been doing ever since the cows have come home. And I don't know why we continue to look to the politicians for an answer to the problems of this nation. They are the problem they are the problem in the nation. And I don't know why we can't get that. They're doing what they've always done. We got a $20 trillion deficit in this country because of the politicians in Washington, where they have already saddled our grandchildren and saddled this nation with debts that cannot be surmounted. They cannot be surmounted by the tax system. We have a tax right now that exceeds the GNP of the nation. We have a GNP of $17 trillion. I knew that was going to happen. Excuse me, 1 second. Let me get out of here. I got friends calling me. They know I do the program at a certain time, and they tell them don't call me from 2 to 3, and that's the person I've told not to call me between 2 and 3. And there he is on the phone. I would have reached through the microphone and smack him. John, I'm not gonna smack him though, because if I smack him, this guy goes to the gym every 3 days.
See, I had a person
smack me back.
I have a friend like that too. When I used to, I would produce shows, and every time he knew a show was starting, he would call, and he knew the time, he knew the schedule, and he'd want to talk. And I went, "I'm busy." Well, you can wait? No, you can't. Okay.
This guy has to talk to me at least 2 times a day, and I don't know what it is. I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out, but I will call him back. But I can't talk to anyone doing the show. Anyone out there right now that is going to call between now and the next 40 to 50 minutes, don't call. I'm trying to do a program here. I got enough problems as it is, and all the heat I'm getting. I need to get away from the heat I'm getting. In addition to the heat I get just because of the kind of broadcast I'm running here at allpointstv.com and also WFOV. But we're here, and we're going to stay here for the next 45 minutes, hopefully uninterrupted. What I was saying is that we're wasting our time expecting politicians to solve this nation's problems. They are part of the problem of the nation. And I don't know of any problem. And I'm talking about throughout history, and I'm not just talking about the United States. I'm talking about throughout history. I don't know of a problem that's ever been solved by politicians anywhere on the planet. If you know of anyone that's in the political arena throughout the annals of history that solved the problems of the nation, you let me know. Going back to ancient Egypt. I'm reading a book right now by John Wilson. I was reading, I'm on the last chapter of that book, and I read a lot of ancient history. And one of my loves is to learn more and more about the culture of ancient Egypt. And I just think if you go back there and look at the politicians during that day, they are the same then as they are now. They're tax agents.
Another thing is too,
that's the role they play.
It seems to be taxation usually sets up really heavy set taxation when it becomes more of less of a concentrated country within a certain given boundary and become more of an empire. Yeah. Now, did Egypt also? I'm going to really kind of admit my ignorance of that. Egypt did have what we considered an empire. They had many tentacles out in different directions, right?
During the time, first of all, not at the very beginning when the traditions of the country was to turn inward, but after the Hyksos invasion after the 13th dynasty, during the second intermediate period of Egypt, Egypt was invaded by an outside group from Asia called the Hyksos, and during their 50-year period of time, they unleashed a couple of non-traditional things in Egypt, and that was this idea that they now got to protect their borders. And that led to a tumbling effect in terms of Egypt deciding that in order to protect its borders, they had to go into empire building. And the Hittites were out there and other groups. The sea people, as they called them, they're now building an empire under the Napoleon of our antiquity, who was Thutmose III, who came into the history books around 1530 or so BC, 1500 or so BC. And at that point, you have Egypt beginning to build an empire, and that empire becomes one that has to be managed now, not from the traditions of Egypt, but by the new status that Egypt has gained as going into these lands and conquering other territories, because they had been conquered and unleashed a lot of things in the Egyptian state that will eventually lead to the downfall of Egypt. And I don't agree, and by the way, I would say this while I'm on the QTN running, I don't agree with Bob Baya, who they want to look at Akhenaten as bringing something different, and the history is recording him as a heretic king, saying that he was the one that began to undo the empire of Egypt. It wasn't Akhenaten that undid the empire of Egypt. What Akhenaten was trying to do was return to the traditions of Egypt that go back to the first 4 dynasties of Egypt's history. Everything that is in the traditions of Egypt, you can see the traditions that are manifested in Egypt from the 4th dynasty and thereon. And there's a conservative element in Egypt, and there's also the more non-traditional element of Egypt. There's also those who love the fact that Egypt has built up a coffer from the empire, and they love that money flowing in. And what Akhenaten is trying to do is return back to the roots of the nation, and they could not understand it. And Bob Bayer, you don't understand it. Your nonsense. I watch your tape sometimes there. But no, Egypt was an empire starting in the 18th dynasty after they had thrown the Hyksos out. And from that point, they began to build an empire. But at some point, when you build an empire, you know it from the history of more modern times. When you build an empire, then you got to manage the empire. If you don't believe that, look at the empire the United States has. Look at all those bases outside the country. Why you think you think they're spending $20 trillion of deficit upon the American people? If so, where's the infrastructure to show for it? Give me a break. You have an expense because America's an empire builder. They don't necessarily go in there and take over the government, but look at how many military bases they have around the world. That's expensive. And so when you build an empire, and you have people on the land space that have to be protected because your empire is all those nations there, and there are people out there waiting for you to, in fact, not defend them. And if you don't defend them, then they come after the territory that you control because they cover that territory also, and that's what's happened to Egypt. That's going to lead to the fall of Egypt because they're writing. Bob Bayer, listen carefully, with your nonsense. And the Afrocentrics also, they got their nonsense too. They got this idea that Kemet means, I'm off my subject. I'm gonna come back to my subject, but I want to go off on this for a while. They got the Afrocentrics got this nonsense on their part, where they're trying to say that Kemet means the black land. And they're not saying it means the black land. That's what Murray. Is saying. She's right about that. It means the black land, but the Afrocentrics are going to say it means the land of the blacks. You need to shut up too, because if they were talking about it means the land of the blacks, it would have been the question would be, where would they get the psychic outlook of Egypt being the land of the blacks if they came from the south, which is the land of the blacks in terms of Kush and Ethiopia and these lands to the south of Egypt, to the part of what is called Upper Egypt. They would not have had any reason to say this is a black land if they came from lands that were black before they arrived there. So that's nonsense too, and I want to call them out on that nonsense. But Bob Bayer does not get what was happening inside of Egypt during the 18th dynasty. That's the one he's talking about with Akhenaten. Akhenaten was about the fourth pharaoh or so in the 18th dynasty, the dynasty that pushed the Hyksos out of Egypt. Akhenaten, or Amenhotep IV, is trying to return Egypt back to its roots. But you see that you see the problem they have there, John, is that they have fallen for the notion that Akhenaten is bringing something new in terms of monotheism. They don't get what the Swiss historian by the name of Eduard Fuentes said. Fuentes said that when you write history, you must either write history from the people that you are writing about in terms of the psyche of that time, or you write history from the psyche of the time in which the history is being written. And most historians write it from the psyche of the time in which they're writing it, and do not get into the psyche of the time period. That's what we're doing with pulling the monuments down, right? That's why pulling monuments down. They want to talk about the morality of the 21st century and then condemn the people who were practicing slavery at a time when everybody was practicing slavery. That's what Fuentes is talking about. The Swiss scholars talking about. You can write history from the standpoint of the psyche of the time that you're writing it, and therefore not making a mistake of condemning something that you're not practicing now. Or you can write it from the standpoint of the psyche of the time period in which it's written, and then write it from that outlook. Your psyche would not be the psyche of the ones you're writing about. and people have not understood that. So when they write history, what Bob Breyer has done, and we're talking about Egypt here now, what Bob Breyer has done is Bob Breyer wants to write the history of Egypt from the standpoint that Akhenaten was bringing something new. But Akhenaten did not bring anything new. Akhenaten was, he did not bring monotheism, nor did Muhammad, nor did Moses, nor any of them. Monotheism has always been in history. The idea, once you have the idea that there's a deity over the apparatus, then there's always been the idea of one God, but not one God exclusive necessarily, but one God in terms of ultimate power that's in place here. And so what they miss is that they want to apply monotheism and do not want to understand and do not understand that Egypt is not monotheism that is the issue here. The issue for Akhenaten is syncretism. The idea that what they would do is when they would have a different God over the Egyptian state and different nomes in Egypt, they would then syncretically apply the deity under a new name to the old ideas of the deity in the new dispensation. But it's not a different dispensation, it is a different name on it. So it looks like that the names change, and therefore there is a monotheistic religion here. It's not any different than it was in the earlier history. Akhenaten didn't bring anything new. What you have here is the Egyptologists looking at Thebes, and they're saying that there's a god now called Amun. And they think that because Amun is to be worshipped to the exclusion of the god of Heliopolis, or the exclusion of who was Ptah, or the god Ptah, no, that'd be Re. In Memphis, the god would be Ptah. In Heliopolis, that's called On in the Bible, called Anu by the Egyptians, you would have the worship of the god Re. Later on, what they would do is combine and say Amun Ra, because they're just combining the attributes. See, you don't get me off on these subjects and these tangents, but I have to tell you something. I'm here to correct these people, because I am not buying the nonsense. They don't know any more than I know. And let's have a discussion about it, because I ain't buying what you're talking about.
You know, yeah, ancient Egypt, I mean, it's a very, I've tried to look into it. It's got so many periods and stuff, it gets very confusing. Like you're talking about different dynasties.
I'm not confused about it.
No, but I mean, I would say, I mean, I think it's like I was going to say though, I mean, you have been part of that Kemet study group for how many years now?
13 years just of that.
So, I mean, it's like where are they meeting at now, by the way?
At the Beanery down there on Grand Traverse.
Okay.
We're meeting again starting up in September, John, and we meet from September until the end of May, and then we break for the summer, and then we come back again in the following September. We'll be going to our 14th year this year.
So what I think is the people who are familiar with your background. I mean, ancient history is interesting, not only just because you really could answer questions. I think it gives you a better understanding of the flaws of human thinking, human foible. And what's your parallel in this? I mean, there's so many parallels between all the ancient empires and our own collapsing, and very similar elements to it.
It is, John. And if we don't really understand the ancient record and how this all began, then it's very difficult, not impossible, but very difficult to understand what's happening in the present time period, because it has an antecedent much older than where we're looking. You have to have the whole picture. You can't have pieces of it that starts at a later time and then try to put all the paradigmatic pieces together to understand what's taking place. You need to go back into the ancient realms when things were put together. And I don't think you can actually understand it in its totality without understanding Egypt, because all of the pieces are found there and not found anywhere else. Because Egypt is the first state that stands up on the stage of history, and that we have a very clear understanding for 4,000 years of its history. We don't have that in any other nation in the world that has that unbroken. When I say unbroken, I mean to say that the culture itself was unbroken. It does not mean it was uninterrupted. And there's no other culture that can claim that. There's a 4,000 year history in the Nile Valley we can study, and then just continue to see how it played out over time and how it interfaced with what happened later on in other cultures that borrowed from the engine that had been there before they arrived on the scene, and took a lot of the things that were antecedent to their civilization and then put it in their own cultural reference as well. And that includes the Greeks, by the way, and also the people of Rome. But I'm not saying that they simply toted the culture of Egypt back to Greece, for example, or toted the culture from Egypt and took it back to Rome, as these persons are claiming. That's nonsense too. Well, and we have to do a lot of correction here, but that's part of it right there.
Well, see, just to use an analogy of like cultural exchange, like, after the end of World War II, after the Japanese were defeated, all of a sudden, within the 50s, there was a real strong interest in Japanese culture. Well, now there's a lot of things that we have, like karate. We use the words of karate and judo and jiu-jitsu and all those Japanese words. And you got the dojos, the studios open. And a lot of people who are just coming, it's like a kid growing up, would consider it just as American as apple pie. So, I mean, just because, something's coming through a culture, and I'm using those analogies because it was really kind of with my own lifetime, I saw that, And you just got these things incorporated. Well, some people would see that and say they see a little chunk of history, and they say, oh, that's already in place, so it's always been existing in this culture. And not necessarily the case, because especially our culture changes so rapidly. And it also had many cultures, when they had such a huge flood of maybe immigrants or such influence because of different new religion, say as Christianity, they would consider, they got woven in to that already existing tapestry, and people would think that was always the case.
Yeah, let me try to bring it back to what I want to at least touch on. We won't be able to get to all of it given my transitioning to a much wider discussion here. I don't mind doing that, and I'm very willing to do it. I think it sometimes is helpful to go off script and do some things that's not intended. Sometimes our conversations have non-intended consequences, and that's fine. I like to do that because we need to be comprehensive. And wherever the discussion goes, I think we're capable of going off and going into those domains. But let me try to bring it back to a part of the discussion I wanted to bring to you today, and that was Mark Levine's program last night. They had Mark Perry on the program. Now they got into Mark Levine was asking about the tariff policies in which Donald Trump is in fact engaged in a tariff, kind of like a tariff war, somewhat going on between the United States and other countries. China's one, and then they are criticizing Trump because there's some tariff, there's some discussion and some anger about the tariff policy of this country toward the allies of the United States. And so what Mark Perry was saying was that he is against the tariff policies of Donald Trump because a tariff, and let's understand this, a tariff is really a tax upon the people who are putting a tariff on incoming goods. He's right about that. He's right about that. Here's, I think, the blind spot. You see, Mark Perry did a good job of discussing the effect of the tariff. And anyone that knows anything about tariff, I mean, we had a war over tariff in this country. We had 2 wars over tariffs in this country. We had a war in 1776 over tariffs, and we had another war in 1861 over tariffs. Maybe you think that the war in 1861 was over slavery. And I'm going to disabuse you of that notion real quick. And I brought a book here. I may not get into it today, but I will get into it next week. I brought a book here called Those Dirty Rotten Taxes by Charles Adams. And I want to read page 81 to about page 83 of this book. And I will read it. I won't read it this time because we got a little more, something else I want to do. But I will read this at the beginning of the program next week. Tariffs are bad because it's a hidden tax. See, tariffs are a hidden tax that born against the people in which the tariff is in fact placed. But it's very popular with politicians because the tariff is a hidden tax through which they get the benefit of it, providing that there is no retaliation against it. In other words, the goods coming into this country, if you put a tariff on it, then the businesses in the country have a protection because they can raise their goods up to the level of the tariff, right below the tariff, and get more money inside of the country, but the consumers are paying more. See, a tariff on inputs, on input into, let's say, Europe. The tariff raises the price of the American good, and it protects the companies inside of that state. Who benefits from that? Well, okay, that's that's our cue to stop ranting for a while and let WFOV take a break, and we will do that. And hope you'll come back in 4 minutes. We're not nearly done here, and what we want to discuss today. Okay, they have taken their break, and we will continue what we're doing here at allpointstv.com, and we'll continue to talk about this issue. Mark Perry is correct about the effect of the tariff, and if it has a protective element to it, then that tariff is inappropriate. We don't want protective tariffs. But Donald Trump is correct in his tariff policies toward the allies and toward the others if there is a trade imbalance between the U.S. and these other countries, and it's because of the tariffs they put on incoming goods, and we do not, in fact, reciprocate by putting a tariff on the goods coming into our country, because that creates an imbalance. But Donald Trump must understand something here. And he has to understand that as long as the tariff is designed to be a corrective, so that the intent of it is to return the import-export businesses to the market, to let the market determine it and not the bureaucrats to determine it. If that's the intent, then to put the tariff in place to bring about the resolution of that problem of our goods being taxed going into other countries and their goods not being taxed in the other country. If he's trying to use the tariff as a way of bringing them to reciprocation, that's a good thing, as long as you don't lose the purpose of why the import tax exists. But if it's existing to protect the national businesses and so on and so forth, and is a protective tariff, that does not serve the ends of the American people, because it raise the tax on the consumer, raise the price on the consumer, and then it invites retaliation by other countries because you are taxing their product. But you see, the thing is, they're already taxing the American exports. And so Donald Trump is trying to even it. Now, that's different than what happened during the so-called Great Depression. In the Great Depression, with the Harlem-Smoot tariff of 1930, what Herbert Hoover signed into law was a protective tariff because he was an idiot. You don't put if you put a protective tariff out there, then you invite all the countries that you put the protective tariff against to attack your goods going out of the country. That's what happened to, that's what brought about the downturn and turned the downturn into the Great Depression. That was caused by government. Because you have stupid people running the American government. Stupid people like Maxine Waters. We have stupid people in government. They don't know anything. We have people in the government that's able to talk themselves into power, and then they get in there and they do overreach with the government, never intended by the framers, and they then get in there and then overreach and reach into the economy, and they cannot see that they are the problem causing the bureaucratic nightmare that we're in because of them. As long as Donald Trump is trying to even the playing field, thank you for coming back, those who are from WFOV. Donald Trump is trying to even the playing field. Now, the danger is if that playing field is even by having those who are attacking our goods going to their country, if they understand they're not going to be able to do that without retaliation on the part of this country against their goods coming into this country, if they will understand that they're not going to be able to get away with that, then the interest of the country is being served by the tariff. If it is there in the aftermath of them, even the playing field, and the government gets in love with the tariff money that comes into the coffers of the federal government, because understand the tariff, that when the tariff is placed on imports in the country, it doesn't go to the businesses, it goes to the government.
Another thing is,
do you understand that?
Yeah. I look back at Ross Perot said back in 20 some years ago. He said he'd go to every country we did business with, and he said, with the same deal we give you, you give us, or we don't do business. And that's that's what I mean. Another thing is here. I don't know if you cover this because I had to step away for a second, but Donald Trump did offer, hey, why don't we do away with all tariffs? He actually offered that. And they're the ones engaging in protectionism and stuff. So, yeah, I mean, and it's like, so what is wrong with saying if we don't put tariffs on your incoming goods, you don't do the same thing to us? What is wrong with that? And this shakeup was a long time in coming. It should have been, it was a can kicked down the road because basically, guess what? Everybody was fearing this very fallout. Donald Trump wasn't fearful. And guess what? He's a vested person. He's probably losing more. He's lost money being a president, where everybody else who's been president has made buku bucks in their coffers. So if you look at who's doing it if he's doing it for his own best interest, and he's really screwing up because it's not better in his bottom line right now. It isn't.
Donald Trump is doing that which is in the best interest of this country. It is doing the things that will make this country great, and he's already, to an extent, become a transformative president in that respect. They are afraid. They're not afraid of Donald Trump failing. They're afraid of Donald Trump succeeding, because if Donald Trump succeeds, John understands this because we talked about it off air. If Donald Trump succeeds, then the socialist agenda, which is the government agenda of those on the left and these rhinos on the right, the question is, the obsolescence of the bureaucrats becomes obvious. And they cannot allow the American people to understand that government is in the way of this country's greatness.
No, people here in Flint, if you're listening here in Flint, if you think the government's the best person to go to, people to go to for your problems in life, we're just dealing with a 4-year-long water crisis, okay, which existed because of government interference and because of government, and it still exists because of government interference. And we're not talking just about the bad boogeyman, Governor Snyder, who played a big role, undoubtedly, but the local government who did nothing right for 20-some years leading up to the events that Snyder got involved in. Yeah. So I mean, it was a cluster. I mean, we call it something cluster but I can't say it on air. But we call it it's a cluster screw, basically. Yeah. And that's what happened. And it was because of governments, people, local and state and federal. Yeah. And you're still looking for these people to help your problems.
John, Ronald Reagan made an understatement when he said that government is not the solution, government is a problem. And it was an understatement in the sense that he did not say government is primarily the only problem. Oh, look in Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution, and you get some sense of what the framers had come up with in terms of restraining these I don't want to use that word on the air, but to restrain these monsters.
Okay, when you go apply for a job, and any of us, we usually have to have a background in the thing we're applying for a job in. Politicians, the only thing they actually are qualified to do is doing what they exactly do: go around knocking on doors and handing out literature and looking good for camera. Because basically, 95% of the local ones I know should never have been elected. they shouldn't have control of a multi-million-dollar budget. City of Flint, even though it's a really strapped financially, it's got millions and millions of dollars somehow coming into it. And they're seen to be screwing with it everywhere. But, they have no qualifications, no background relevant to the job. None.
They don't like me in this town, and I don't care whether they like it or not. I'm speaking right to them and in their face, and I don't care what they think about it. I'm saying the truth, and they cannot come behind anything I say and prove otherwise, and that makes me even madder. You can get mad, but you're not going to stand anything down that I say. Because anybody that believes in politicians on any level, that they are in fact doing the most good for the most people, and that is the totality of their interests. They have surrounded themselves with a community of interest that they're trying to carry out and do the best that they can do. If you find a government anywhere on the planet that's doing that, you let me know, because that's not what government is about. And the reason, I keep saying this over and over again because it's in our dogma, and it shows you the mindset of the framers. You see it in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. To understand that second paragraph is to understand the role of government. Listen to this carefully. I said it last week, I said it again. It said, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just consent from the consent of the governed. Now that's why so the reason we have government is because there might be some bullies out here, and they always are bullies that are bigger than the individual. So we need a umbrella protection around our rights, and we said governments to secure the rights that we have. Everything was to be based upon government playing the role of protecting the rights of the people. That's not the role government is playing now, because governments are taking the rights of the people and doing things that are prohibited by the Constitution. Never intended for the government to get as big as it is. And in Article 1, Section 4, it says that the people in Washington, that's Maxine Waters, and the rest of those hoodlums up there, the gang, they got two gangs up there. One gang is the Democratic Party, and there's another gang up there right now, the majority gang, is the Republican Party. And they're not getting anything done either. And we voted the Democrats out because they didn't get anything done under Obama, and we put the Republicans in there, and they're not doing anything. The single voice that is somewhat coherent in Washington right now is Donald Trump. That's the only voice you got up there that's making any sense. Now the rest of those noisemakers up there that are talking about the children, they love the kids. The kids, they're being separated from their parents. And then the media puts that in the press and make people believe that this is the first time this happened and Donald Trump is a monster because he is in fact enforcing the laws that they passed. They want to enforce the laws. This problem can be fixed overnight that we're dealing with right now. But they're not going to fix the problem. You know why? Because politicians are basing their power upon the continuation of these problems. They're creating the problems and then being called to the rescue as the fire engine to put the fire out. They caused the problem.
I don't understand. I don't understand the black leadership.
Give me a break.
Of congressmen, black senators backing this idea of basically no borders, because it's going to affect those people who are on the bottom echelon of the economic scale are going to have to face off with each other more often. So the influx of people who are willing to take the jobs at even a lower serious, rate per hour, because a large portion of the reason why they can do that because they don't get taxed. They don't really talk about the rural taxation in this whole mix either. But anyway, you're gonna have basically these poor blacks and these poor Hispanics fighting each other. It's gonna be more vicious on them. I don't understand why they back it. That's not gonna change. That's not gonna change. That's an economic driving force. That's not going to change.
Why do you think that Maxine Waters, John, is up there doing the screaming? And she made a comment this past weekend saying that the people should go to these restaurants and go to the homes of the persons that are staff members in the Donald Trump administration and go in there and harass them. He was calling for that. Why do you think she's doing that?
She wants pressure. She wants to make them crumble. That's what she wants to do. And I think it's so irresponsible because what happens when all those guys take it further? People take it further and start killing people. I didn't mean that. Well, guess what? You pretty much stirred the pot. You should have to lick the spoon. You know what I mean?
She's doing it for that reason, but she's also doing it for another reason, to give the appearance. This is what was said in the book. She's doing it for the appearance of leadership. In the book called The Head Negro in Charge Syndrome, she's giving, there's the appearance of leadership as opposed to leadership. And so it looks like they are leading blacks because they're out here doing all the screaming and hollering and so on and so forth. Okay, let's say that you do what Maxine Waters said this past weekend, that you go out here and you harass the press secretary of the Trump administration, and she's out there being asked to leave the restaurant because they're attacking those persons in the Trump administration. Tell me what has been resolved among the constituents of Maxine Waters, who doesn't even live in the district that she's supposed to be representing. She lives in another district where she could not get elected to dog catch in that district. She runs over here where the blacks are, and then they serve them, living in a $4 million house over there where only 12% of the blacks live. She's representing a community that is predominantly black in a district that she doesn't live in, and she gets up there in front of them and emote all this nonsense, and they're brain dead and continue to vote this woman into power over and over again because they're brain dead, the people that's doing that. And until they understand how they're being run around in circles, which is the black leadership and the Congress running around in circles, there's not one member of the Congressional Black Caucus representing in their districts. And somebody ought to go to their districts and look at how their districts look. They get the worst representation. At the same time, understand that in 2010, when the voters went to the poll, because they had 2 years of Obama and that wasn't working out, they went to the poll and voted the Democrats out and changed the House from the Democrats to the Republicans. Not one black Democrat in the Congressional Black Caucus, made up nothing but Negroes, they did not lose a single seat in the House of Representatives. They only have one senator, and that's Cory Booker. Somebody to go and read about the person working on his campaign. You won't believe this, but I'm gonna tell you who it was. One of the person worked on Cory Booker's campaign was one of the persons that was firing at Malcolm X in the Audubon Ballroom on the 21st of February, 1965. William Bradley, and that's not something I'm saying here anew. That's documented. It shows you the respect he has for black people. And so I'm just telling you, we don't have any representation up there. And Robert C. Smith is right in the book he wrote called "We Have No Leaders," and we don't have any leaders. This idea of black leadership is another myth. A myth that we have leadership in the Democratic Party, Republican Party, all of that nonsense. You can forget that too. Black people don't have any leaders. And the only voice out there that's semi-rational are the ones out there that black people throwing water at them, thinking they're wrong. Kanye West is saying exactly what needs to be said right now. And so is the person that he is mimicking in terms of the point of view she's putting out there, Constance Owens. She's saying it the right way. That woman is on fire.
Candace Owens?
Candace Owens.
I don't know much about her, but she seems, I've read some memes made about her stuff, and she seems like she's an individualist, and I love that part. She's an individualist.
Very much individualist. Yeah. And John, they got to put her down, because if black people start listening to those kinds of people, what is Al Sharpton going to do? The Tawana Brawley nonsense he put out there to bring about his national name, putting this nonsense out that all these people, Pagonas and others, had raped this woman, this 16-year-old girl, and that's the basis on which they ran this nonsense on the black community that wasn't paying attention. The two black lawyers involved in it, Maddox and Mason, they were disbarred and have never practiced law since that time period. But Sharpton goes on to become a national, quote-unquote, black leader, a black leader of my foot.
The potential for harm to innocent people on all sides was so high. Every one of them involved in that travesty, that attempt at that scandal should have been arrested and thrown in prison for 25 years.
Sharpton should have been thrown in prison by now. And they're not going to put him in prison because Sharpton is part of the misdirection to keep black people in check on the Democratic Party plantation. But when black people wake up and understand how these charlatans have misled them all these years, well, we had a community that was pretty much intact at one time. Look at it right now, where you can't even go outside your door. Where did that danger come from? It came from these people out here that have been running black people around in a circle for the last 50 years.
See, I realize I'm white, but I've lived in the city. It's become an increasingly black population over the years. I'm 55. And so guess what? I remember back when I was a kid, the black community was a community. And it wasn't the horrific violence that's going on now. Any of the cities, but especially in Flint, because that's what I'm intimately aware of. But now I don't see how they can see that and look past and say, gee, we're so much better now than we were before. I mean, in some ways, they can move around to get more motility. But when you just look at the shredding of the black community, I definitely don't think that's a good positive payout.
We got to understand what's going on, John, and we don't understand it because we got so much misdirection out there going on by those who control the information centers of the country. The liberal media, MSNBC, NBC, ABC, CBS, and the rest of these bogus networks, CNN, don't leave them out, the fake news that are making a mockery of the intelligence of the American people, by making them believe that the man that came in to fix this nonsense is the one that's causing the problem. Like, for example, how they used this thing last weekend to make it look like Donald Trump was doing something different than what Obama did. Obama was doing the same thing and probably more of it. You got, they talk about separation of the children. Every time a person commits a crime in this country and he has children, and you put him in jail, but you can't put the children in jail because the children did not do the violation, you're separating the criminal from the parents. You all do that every day.
I was surprised by Jeh Johnson. Jeh Johnson, he was in Obama's administration. He admitted on a national TV show that this same thing went on during Obama's administration. I was shocked because he was not, to me, it never struck a person who had intellectual honesty, but he came forth and said that. Now, you don't hear much of that. I don't know if you heard that or not, but he admitted it. He admitted that. So, I mean, where's the fury? Where was the fury at then? Where is this anger and this angst at? Where was it?
The American people are being led by the nose by the fake news media, and because of the power they have. John, there's so many things here we need to talk about what's really going on in the country, and very little of what's going on in the country is being reported as to what's going on. And that's both in terms of what is happening now in the news, and it's also what's happening in the nation's history. If we had an understanding of any of this, we would be better decision makers. But we're not even good decision makers because we don't have the right information to make a good decision in this country. This country, by and large, is I hate to say this because it's not like I'm being braggadocious, but this country is brainwashed, and it's brainwashed every day. You turn, I think Denzel Washington said this. He said, if you listen to the news, you are misinformed, and if you don't listen to the news, you are disinformed. In other words, if you don't know what they're talking about, you are disinformed because you're not able to understand where the problems are in what they're reporting. But if you don't listen to the news, and if you listen to the news, they are doing nothing but misinforming you by what they're reporting. These people are the news in this country is part of the deep state in this country. Have you picked up on that yet?
Did you ever see the
part of the deep state is the media?
Did you ever see the list of people who are in administrations and who all, like the Obama administration, who have family members married to these people who are in the news outlets? I mean, it was very, to use the term in a wider sense, very incestuous. Okay, I mean the former administration is really tied to the people of all the major news networks. I mean, they're all intermarried. They're cousins, they're brothers, sisters, sister-in-laws. I mean, if that doesn't scream a conflict of interest, I don't know what does.
Yeah. You can go back to Egypt and see that also. John, let me ask you a question. I'll take a break now and ask you a question. Do you know that we had in this country, in your and my lifetime, a president and a president and a vice president in this country, neither of whom had been elected by the American people?
Oh yeah, there was Ford. Gerald Ford wasn't elected as president. And let's see, in our lifetime,
in our lifetime, a president and a vice president in this country, in our lifetime, neither of whom were elected by the American people.
I'm thinking about going back to Truman because when he first became president, he was a vice president. He wasn't
you're in the right space in what you said earlier. I'm saying who's the vice president?
Oh, I don't know. That's when I'm drawing a blank on.
Gerald Ford and Nelson Rockefeller.
Okay, Rockefeller. Yep.
John, why didn't the American people see that? You know why they didn't see it? Because the media, the fake news, did not point out what happened in 1974, August the 9th of that year, in which Nixon resigned his office. But not before now, not before. Gerald Ford had been moved up into the vice presidency after he had in fact removed, through threat, Spiro Agnew. Remember him when he was the vice president?
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
Okay, Spiro Agnew was the vice president, elected in 1972. And they removed him first by threatening him, if you don't step down, then this is going to be exposed. And when he stepped down, they moved Gerald Ford up to the vice presidency, and then they moved Nixon out of power. Listen, look carefully, John. Moved Nixon out of power, not through the Constitution. Let me read the Constitution to you. Here's how you remove a president. We do have a way of removing the president. I'm asking you out there in the audience, is this the remedy that you saw in terms of removing the president? I can quote it, but I'm going to read it to you where you won't think I'm making this stuff up. Article 2, Section 4. Let me read this to you. I'll read it first, but I'll quote it as well. Article 2, Section 4 says this. The Congress, let me make sure I got Article 2, Section 4. Yeah. The President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Is that what you saw in 74? Did Richard Nixon, who had been elected by the American people in 1972, did the American people see their representatives go and impeach Richard Nixon, and then after impeachment try him in the Senate and remove him from office? Is that what you saw? Richard Nixon was not impeached. In other words, what is found in this document right here, in order to remove the president, you do have a remedy inside the Constitution. Is that the remedy that you saw in 74? When Nixon was taken, when Nixon resigned the presidency, is that what you saw? Nixon was hounded out of office by the Washington Post and by the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times and other national media that drove and hounded him out of office through Watergate. People thought that they were looking at something just like with Donald Trump right now with those children. They thought they're looking at something that, look at the horror, what's going on here? And they went out there and were herded by the media, as they're doing right now, by the way. They're herding the media the same way. And the American people have got to stop letting people abuse their intellect with this nonsense they got going on right now. Because if it does not get done in the time that Donald Trump is in office right now, with these gangsters otherwise in control, and they're trying to undo the election in 2016 through Robert Mueller, that's another coup d'etat. And it's by the same players that they use with Richard Nixon. If you don't believe that, go back and read the book by Carl Bernstein and Robert Woodward. Robert Woodward and Carl Bernstein wrote a book called All the President's Men. Go read that book. All the President's Men by Carl Bernstein and the other culprit, still with the Washington Post, by the way, Bob Woodward, Car 54, where are you? What happened to him? Why don't we hear from Bob Woodward that was so concerned about Watergate? Why is he concerned about Robert Mueller? Why is he so quiet? Has anybody asked that question? Why are these Watergate, hoodlums like Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, why are they so quiet about this coup d'etat? Because they support it. That's why they're quiet. This is a quiet coup they're trying to run on the American people. And I'll prove it by telling you this. Go back and look at Deep Throat that they had during Watergate. Who was Deep Throat? Deep Throat was inside of the government that was feeding information out from the government to Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward. And when he finally came out after some 20 years later, almost 30 years later, and they identified Deep Throat, guess who Deep Throat was? It was Mark Felt, the assistant director of the FBI. Look at what we have now with what's happened to Donald Trump. The assistant director of the FBI, McCabe, and look at the director of the FBI, James Comey. Same thing. They're running a coup in this country.
Will you ever hear the alternate explanation for the letters FBI? I grew up here, and it's Fink's Battalion of Idiots. And I say I always grew up around people who are more Republican or libertarian leaning. So they introduced the idea to me like the FBI shouldn't exist. It's not mentioned in the Constitution. It's not mentioned.
John, it shouldn't exist because we don't have any provision in our Constitution for a secret national police force in this country. And now they've gone beyond that. In 1978, they set up a secret court in this country.
Another thing is we got the Secret Service. Why do we need the Secret Service when what they're supposed to investigate, well, largely, they should have presidential protection. They should just label it as that. They should have investigation for fraud, because of counterfeiting should be in the hands of the Treasury. I could see no problem with that. But call it the Secret Service, and it's a chirping of crickets there. I mean, nobody says anything. That's that's a telling you thing. The SS. So Secret Service. We shouldn't have those people exist either, in my opinion.
Our country has been captured by the criminal element. I brought a book last week, and I was talking about this book written by Thomas DeLorenzo. Thomas DeLorenzo has a book out everybody should read. It's called Organized Crime, and the subtitle of it is, because you may think organized crime, you're talking about the book written by Peter Mars, the book called The Valachi Papers. You may be thinking about, we're talking about what Joe Valachi would have revealed when he talked about the mafia and gave us the real name of the mafia, which is our thing, called La Cosa Nostra. Italian, in Italian, it means our thing. Not that all Italians were a part of the mafia. I'm not certainly making that case. I'm just simply saying it was that they were saying that in this little segment of the Italian population, this was their thing. And he was talking about the mafia, or talking about the Cosa Nostra. But when Thomas DeLorenzo talks about organized crime, he subtitles his book The Unvarnished Truth About Government, because he's talking about these organized gangsters in Washington D.C. and they're trying to run a coup right now because they do not agree with the outcome of the election November the 8th, 2016, because the American people put Donald Trump in there. And they're trying to hide their dislike of the decision that the American people made by trying to claim that Russian collusion. And the press is not going to point out that this has nothing to do with collusion. I'm waiting for that report. I already know what they're trying to do based upon that. Wednesday, watch what's going on there. We're going to bring Peter Strzok before the House committee. We're going to see what he talks about there. Peter Strzok, the former person inside the FBI, they finally got rid of him. We'll see what he talks about. Okay, let me get out of here. I got to come together next week to try to tie all these ends together. Got into a lot of different discussions. I'll try to tie all of these missing ends together next week. Until next week, I want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.